Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. Today we have a variety show. I'm joined with my usual co-host, Anthony Marquetta, and a good friend of the show, David Halquist. How are you gentlemen doing?
Good day. Quite well.
Good.
The screams are waking me up less often than usual.
That's weird. We need to fix that. Let me know and I'll set you up with some more screams.
Good, good, good.
All right. So today what we're talking about is sort of a mishmash of topics, but it's all based on a certain theme, and that's the storycraft. Recently, Anthony will tell us more about it, but essentially, Epic the Musical came out with a set of animatics that included Odysseus using, I almost said Theseus for some reason, using the Bag of Winds as a jetpack. It's dumb. It is a dumb idea.
Mm.
Anthony, take it away.
Yeah, so we've talked about it twice on the show before, once at length and once briefly. I am a big fan of Epic the Musical, and I still am. To be clear, it wasn't so bad that I'm like, wow, I'm never, my whole viewing experience is now ruined. That's not true.
Hmm.
Uh, but but I will say this is probably the first major decision in the story that I didn't like at all. Like every other decision, I was on board with as a creative choice for his adaptation of the Odyssey. This one I was not. So to set the scene of what's going on here, what fascinated me most about this decision and why we're talking about it in terms of storycraft is that as a writer myself, I could see the bones of like why he decided to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So to set the stage of what was going on here, Odysseus has just gotten off of Calypso's island. Hermes grabs him and says, "You're allowed to leave. Something happened with the gods that Odysseus doesn't know about, but we do." And he says, "You can go. And in order for you to, and I'm going to give you instructions on how to get past the monsters in the way and to find your way to Ithaca. And all you have to do is not open the bag of wind that we have retrieved for you that contains Poseidon's storm, because Poseidon hates Odysseus and doesn't want him to get home, uh, just like in the original Odyssey. So the first few songs in this saga, which is called the Vengeance Saga, are great. I actually really like all three of them, which is "I'm Not Sorry for Loving You," which Calypso sings when Odysseus leaves. "Dangerous," which is the song that Hermes sings when he gives him the instructions on how to get home, and "Get in the Water," which is a villain song because right before Charybdis, sorry, Charybdis, which is how Odysseus gets past the giant whirlpool monster Charybdis. Uh,
No.
I almost forgot that because it's like a 2-minute song, so it kind of is easy to forget. And then
Mm-hmm.
"Get in the Water." So just before Odysseus reaches Ithaca, Poseidon reveals that he has been waiting for him, and he gets a great villain song where he tells him that if he doesn't get in the water, he will drown Ithaca. Right? Odysseus is thrown into the water, and he looks like he is about to die. The spirits of his dead crew surround him. But then Odysseus gets a second wind, literally, takes the bag of wind that he has been using to hold Poseidon's storm, uses it as a jetpack, and then takes on Poseidon in one on one combat, using the bag of wind to propel him back and forth so that he can win the fight and move at super speed. Right?
Mm.
Okay, so the why it's bad is kind of obvious when you're looking at it in the moment because it just looks very silly. And there are issues of like, wait, so he learned how to use this with like incredible precision on the fly in that moment. Like he could just power it and is now so good at using it, he could take on a god and win. Right? And also, it just looks very silly. I think, as David put it, it comes across as almost like science fiction y, even though it's not, because we think of jetpacks as science fiction, and that's essentially how he's using it. Uh, so it's really, really, it just doesn't really work,
It
right? It's a very odd thing to see.
it
Uh,
honestly sounds like the sort of thing a bunch of players would do in a game. They're like,
yeah,
"Hey,
that's
we could use the
exactly.
bag for this."
So this is where it gets interesting to me, and why I found this decision so interesting. I have a lot of sympathy for what Jorge, who is the creator, Jorge Rivera Herranz, is doing here because I totally understand like where he came from with it, right? Like in Epic the Musical, Jorge uses a lot of what I would call, and I think what other people have called, gamification of concepts, where like he's not following the myth exactly. So because things are moved out of order or done in different ways, he needs to come up with slightly different solutions than the ones used in the poem. So because of that, he will play around with the mythological concept, sort of like you would do in, like David said, like a D&D campaign, right? Or a role playing or an RPG campaign. So, for example, in the poem The Odyssey, they sack the island of the Saconis and they get a special extra strong wine from the Saconis, which is what he gives to the Cyclops later to knock him out. Well, in Epic the Musical, the song where they go to the island of the Saconis is cut entirely. It's not in Epic, so they never go to the island of the Saconis. So he does not have this extra strong wine. How does he knock out the Cyclops? Well, the answer that we are given is that he takes Lotus from the island of the Lotus Eaters and places it in the wine that he gives to the Cyclops. This is great. 10 of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, really clever. I like it. Uh, Later, there's a similar thing that happens. In the poem The Odyssey, he does not actually meet Poseidon. Never in any scene do him and Poseidon interact one-on-one. However, in Epic the Musical, in order to give more of a presence to like the villain, he does. In one of the best songs in the whole musical, Ruthlessness, Poseidon explains his philosophy that ruthlessness is mercy upon ourselves, and drowns all of Odysseus's crew. Now he is face to face with Poseidon, so how does he escape? Well, in the original poem, it's just like a really bad storm, and they wash up on the island of the Laestrygonians, and then they like just, he just survives, like he gets lucky, right? The storm doesn't quite kill him; it washes him to shore. But you can't really do that if Poseidon is face to face with you. So how does he escape? Well, they establish in the previous song, "Keep Your Friends Close," that Odysseus saved some of the wind from the wind bag, and then he uses that extra wind to escape from Poseidon, right? This is another gamification that works really, really well. So we have two different occasions where Jorge has done this, and both times it's worked. So now we're at this third time, and another thing that's going on here is that thematically the windbag actually kind of makes sense as well. So you could see why Jorge is seeing it on multiple levels. Okay, it's a tool I've given Odysseus, and it's a tool, I've done this in the past, and it's worked really well. He's using it in a creative way. It shows Odysseus' cleverness, right? And then you have that it even fits thematically, because in the previous saga, Athena, in trying to save Odysseus, lets go of her previous philosophy, which is similar to Poseidon's of ruthlessness, and embraces a philosophy where literally her armaments, her shield and spear are destroyed, and she crawls her way over to Zeus and begs him to help, and then dies, or maybe dies, like a mortal, right? She essentially gives up her godhood, at the very least is not acting like a god, right? And acts like a mortal in order to help Odysseus. Well, Odysseus in this moment takes up the bag of wind, so the storm of Poseidon and with the bag of Aeolus, and then he takes, at the end of the saga, Poseidon's trident to use against him, and takes on the rudiments of a god, and instead of begging someone for mercy before he dies, he repeatedly stabs someone while he begs him for mercy, and Odysseus ignores it. So it's a parallel character arc where Athena gives up the rudiments of godhood and either dies or is willing to die or almost dies as a mortal, at the very least is acting mortal. And Odysseus takes on the rudiments of godhood and is acting as a god in order to defeat a god, right? So for all of these reasons, the windbag idea, you could see why someone like Jorge would think this really works. It makes a lot of sense, right? But it doesn't. It doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because, as good as all of this looks in theory, when you actually see it in practice, it does not play the way I'm sure it did to Jorge in his head. It looks too ridiculous. It doesn't look intimidating, and it doesn't fit the vibe of Epic the Musical. So, what's the solution here? What should Jorge have done? My theory here is that Jorge emphasizes a lot that Epic the Musical is his baby and he is the creator, and he's done this. He needed someone to hear the windbag idea and tell him, I get what you're going for. The thematic parallels, it's logically coherent, at least mostly, right? And it makes sense thematically, but you need to come up with something better, right? Like, you need to come up with something that fits the vibe more and is more satisfying to the audience.
Even
Because
great
this isn't
artists
going
need someone to tell them no once in a while.
right. He needed somebody there, like, essentially to tell him no. And this is so interesting to me because I just went through a similar experience with Ben, who is my editor, where I'm not going to go into the details, but we were discussing a story element. I came up with an idea that I thought worked pretty well, that it was in character for everyone, it was logically consistent, and it solved some problems. And Ben heard it and then said, yeah, none of what you said is wrong, but this is not going to be satisfying for the reader. You need to come up with something better, right? And I did. I seriously thought about it for several days, actually, and I came up with an idea that I like a lot more and that I think is going to be a lot more satisfying. We will see. The readers will decide.
Yep.
Nevertheless, like, it is very helpful to have that voice of someone who goes like, even though this can work, you need someone to go like, no, this won't satisfy, right? This isn't going to the viewer, the reader, right? The audience is not going to resonate with this in the way that you want them to. And I'm very sympathetic to what Jorge did. It's also very interesting that in the song itself, like, if you don't have a visual with it, there is no reference to him using the windbag as a jetpack,
Yep.
which is kind of interesting.
I'm
Like,
convinced
go ahead.
pretty much all of Phantom Menace exists because he didn't have an editor or anyone that was at least willing to, like, stand up and say, no, this is a terrible idea.
Oh yeah, this is well documented, and you're absolutely right. Phantom Menace is a great example of the Star Wars prequel trilogy generally is a great example of, and I think this is why you get people who nowadays who try and reinterpret it as like a stealth masterpiece. It's not. It's terrible. But I understand it because they're right in that the ideas in theory do work. What you need is somebody to go, okay, I get what you're going for, but this won't satisfy the audience. You need to come up with something that works better, right? Like, that does satisfy. Because that's the real problem with the windbag, right? The problem with the windbag is that as coherent of an idea as it is in the overall fabric of Epic, in a sense, there is a point where you have to be like, this doesn't satisfy the audience, right?
Yep.
It just doesn't. You know, it's not going to work as the way that you think it works, right? Even though it seems like it would, it fits in a lot of ways. When you actually see Odysseus flying like it's a jetpack, people are not going to go, oh man, that's cool. They're going to go, that looks silly, right?
Yes.
Like, which has been the reaction. Like, I've noticed even the Wisdom Saga got a very, very, very positive reaction. And to be fair, Vengeance Saga has as well, right? But if you notice, if you look into, like, the details of the reactions, there's a lot of people going like, yeah, didn't care for the jetpack. Right? Like,
Which again
there was
is
one
a part of the animatic more than anything else.
yeah, like,
So it didn't
if
have
you-
to be there.
You're absolutely right. And if it were me, if you were to ask me, like, well, what would you do if you were writing this? I would say that Poseidon's storm, when Odysseus fell into the water, his storm angered the dead crewmen of Odysseus, and they empowered him to strike back against Poseidon. And if it were me, I think that totally, like, I would have been very satisfied with that. It fits thematically. Sure, it's kind of a little sort of maybe bullshit, but in Greek myth, it is at least in the mode of myth in the way that using a jetpack is not.
Right.
right?
A jetpack
Um,
is a purely modern contrivance. Like if Flash Gordon or Luke Skywalker or but I repeat myself kind of
Yeah, it'd be
or
fine.
yes.
it'd be completely fine. Han Solo, even like Darth Vader, like any of the Star Trek guys, um, John Carter even kind of has a jetpack at some points. Uh, it's like, and he can just jump forever. So it's like there's plenty of opportunities for it, but the mode is specifically science fiction. In the realm of fantasy, which even though it's epic is very much in the Greek myth tradition, it's not necessarily the same genre as fantasy. Uh, having a wizard cast fly on him only kind of works. Sure. Like Hermes giving him his flying
If you had
boots
like
works.
Daedalus wings or something, yeah.
Yeah, but
But
it's like there's how do I want to put it? There's usually something balancing it out. For example, Cersei needs to be brought down a notch, and his men need to be freed. Icarus just getting his wings means he becomes hubristic, which is the number one running theme of Greek myth, and he flies
Hmm.
too close to the sun.
right.
Um, so it's like there has to be a payoff of some kind to balance out the scales of the Greek gods. If there isn't one, it doesn't it doesn't have the flavor that people can recognize as missing, but not necessarily name.
Yeah, exactly. Like the idea of the jetpack, you might go, well, it's not literally a jetpack, it's the bag of wind. Right, but he's using it as a jetpack. Anybody who
Mm-hmm.
watches it immediately their mind goes to jetpack and you're taken out of the story.
Oh,
There's also the fact that it just doesn't really make sense. It's like, why would this give you the power to beat Poseidon? Having a jetpack doesn't give you the power to beat a god in combat. It doesn't give him super strength. Like the only thing he has, like he's faster than normal, I guess, but like, I don't know.
Mm,
If Poseidon goes into the water and sticks up his trident, then he'll get skewered.
right.
You know, it,
it,
it doesn't really work.
it occurs to me something. Sort of the untrustworthy narrator uh, theory, which for the Odyssey, which you subscribe to, and I've thought more, been thinking on that for a while. And one thing that actually kind of makes that come alive, now that I've thought about it in context of other Greek myths, is everything that goes wrong is the fault of his men, pretty much.
Yes.
It's never his fault. It's never his hubris. It's never his desire for beautiful women or wealth or forbidden knowledge or whatever it happens to be. And that's kind of out of character for Greek myths, right? Like you think of any of the great heroes, and they've all got some kind of jelly spot that brings them down in the end. Except Odysseus, it was all his men's fault. But you can trust Odysseus. He's the most famous liar ever.
Well, it's like with Theseus and his friend, half brother, whatever, going down into Hades. Uh, Theseus is going to go after Helen of Troy, and he's this guy's going to go after Persephone, the Dread Queen, and they're going to be bros together about it. Uh, that's absolutely huge amounts of hubris that
Mm-hmm.
Theseus was definitely known for.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know,
I'm just picturing them like
hmm.
fist bumping as they go in.
Oh well, what is it? It's not overly sarcastic productions. That's how they depict it, where with like Theseus and him fist bumping, and then like Hades is standing there, very calm faced, and then immediately starts tormenting him with snakes after he sticks them on a high chair that they can't get out
Right.
of. So it's like it's definitely a running theme.
Hmm. Yeah, and I don't know, like it.
Sorry, and it's not a reward for trouble. I want to be clear on that. like even for guys like Perseus, they receive the stuff, but it's not uh how do I want to put it? Like they're expected to use it as tools. It's not like a video game reward. There, sorry, I'm done.
No, no, that's good. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the thing about this portion of Epic, and the reason that the Vengeance Saga, which is the name of it, overall is still received very well, is that first, this didn't even end the song. There is another bit to the song afterward that is great, and everybody seems to really love, which is Odysseus torturing Poseidon. Granted, it's a little bit odd because why wouldn't Poseidon just drown Ithaca as soon as Odysseus leaves? The one argument I have heard against this is, oh, well, Poseidon believes that, ruthlessness is mercy, and now Odysseus has proven he is more ruthless, so he's not going to mess with him. But I don't buy that.
Mm,
Odysseus still can't swim. Like, if you drown Ithaca, Ithaca's drowned.
yes.
Uh, like, it doesn't really matter that he was able to use this specific power to beat him once. It doesn't mean that Poseidon can't drown Ithaca. But whatever. To be honest, this is more like a fridge logic thing
Yes.
than in the moment issue. Uh, it doesn't, and that scene is very, very satisfying in the moment. So I don't really have a problem with it. Uh,
And it's not like he can
yeah,
go, so what are you going to do now? Well, I'm going to make sweet love to my wife, raise the son I haven't seen in 20 years, and sacrifice every bull I can get my hands on to Poseidon until he's
yep,
happy with me again. Like
which
it,
is exactly what happens in the Odyssey, by the way.
yes, exactly. So I'm
Uh,
saying it's not going to be that much of an issue if anyone's like trying to
yeah,
fridge
not if
logic it.
he's not dumb.
Yep.
Uh, as long as he does his due diligence, yeah. You are correct, but yeah. So I'm still excited. Part of the reason I'm excited too is that the Ithaca saga is the saga that we've actually had the most leaks for, which is the next one. Like we have one entire song leaked in full, and very long snippets of all of the other songs, and like it's all really good. Uh, so there's no reason not to be excited over what's coming. But it's definitely like the one moment of Epic that I would say it's the one decision I don't think really worked. Uh, However, there is some hope with this being a concept album and him not including any of that in the music,
Mm.
which is important, which is very important. That he can go in and change some of this later. Like having him get empowered by the crew, I think, is just a much better idea. And again, like there's a sense where it's a little bit where you go, well, when did you establish that this was a thing? I mean, I guess you didn't, but it's more in the mode of myth, right?
Yes.
Like it's the way that myths work, and you could even say like, why are they helping him now? Well, Poseidon's storm roused them, and they couldn't be buried, right? Because
He's
Poseidon drowned them.
like
You know,
it could even be as simple as he's literally sitting on a throne of the wrecked ships. It's not that hard.
yeah, there's
Uh,
a lot of different things. Or that what I would do is I would say like Poseidon's storm roused the spirits, which can't go to the underworld because they
well,
drowned, right? You need to.
technically they did go to the underworld. They show up as
Oh
one of
yeah,
the
we do
chorus
see them
lines.
at one point, don't we?
Yeah.
That's true. We do see the spirits in the underworld at one point. Well, maybe they couldn't rest or something, right?
Mm.
Or the spirit or the storm has caused them not to rest. Either way, that's the way that I would do it. Alternatively, the other option, although I understand that this isn't quite as satisfying, like in the way that Epic is telling its story, is honestly that you just have Athena show up and put him in quick thought.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or
and I under
like literally one line, uh, you know, oh captain, like where they're singing in the background. Like that's it. That's all they need to do. It's really not that
Yep.
Like
crazy.
a transition, basically.
I mean, you could have a cool thing like, yeah, exactly. You could have a cool thing too, where if you remember in Little Wolf when Athena
Hmm.
transitions Telemachus to Quick Thought, if you do a reprise of Little Wolf to transition Odysseus to Quick Thought, uh, something like when I have Athena say something. I'm not going to make up a song now, but like something like you're gonna give up that easily. You could even tell him open the wind bag and
Yes.
or something, right?
Oh,
And
this
then
is too
blast
easy.
him out of the water. You don't need to use it as a jetpack just to get him out of the water. And then because he's moving in slow motion, you could have him, maybe like he's dodging Poseidon's blows and cutting him down,
Or
right?
you just have Poseidon be like a force of nature that he's supposed to be. He's in these huge waves and like he thinks he's doomed and he's about to give up. And Athena actually just shows him a vision of home. She's waiting,
Yeah, you could do.
right?
There's lots of things. Like, I think that he got too caught up in the idea of gamifying the
Mm.
moment, right? Which is why,
Mm-hmm.
like, this is something that should have been more in the mode of myth than the mode of, like, what specific thing is going to solve this problem. Like, that's not how this particular moment had to be handled. And I don't want to say it's a shame because, like, far from even, it didn't even ruin the song, right? Like, it
Right.
just kind of ruined the moment of the song. Uh, but it definitely is like an opportunity. I think that if he had the chance to do it again, which hopefully he does,
Mm.
might want to do differently. Yeah. So constructive criticism. Okay, I promised you that we would not spend the whole time talking about Epic, and I will keep my promise. We can move on to
Sure.
the next thing.
Well, we don't have to, but it's like at this point because we're still pretty early. But it's the important thing is that one, he didn't have anyone telling him that was a bad idea, that was cringe. But also,
Mhm.
like, he didn't have the training to look at his piece objectively. Like, I love Anthony and Ken and David and Mariel and all these other people, and I love sending them my stuff, even when I don't read it. Uh,
I read most of them sometimes.
the camera's off, so you can't see where I'm staring at, but it's off in the distance, a single tear. Uh,
Right.
but like,
Single manly tear.
right. I had a moment where I was working on a story and I thought up an idea. There's a character who can jump. Now this is basically it is a fan fiction. Who am I kidding? And I'm doing it just to basically bust out a novel and get some muscles up.
Mhm.
And because I'm enjoying it immensely. Okay, you wrinkled it out of me. Uh, but
You gotta
basically,
level up right somehow.
a
Yep.
character can jump into visions of people's uh, pasts. This is Nastasia Romanoff from Rachel Griffin series. Uh,
Ah.
the conceit of the story that I'm writing is that the paranormal Pinkertons have been transported as one of the Metaplutonians into the Rachel Griffin world, essentially to fight and to slay monsters and stuff like that. Like that's like there's different characters have different roles. Their role is essentially elite shock troops. Um, uh, these characters, one of these characters essentially were the last people standing in the Ragnarok of their own world. Two of the characters, which is unusual for them, have essentially quirks to their abilities that prevent their memories from being destroyed. Not that they have perfect memories, it's just that they're immune to spells that change memories. That's a better way to put it. And that's Sean Russo, thanks to his Ring of Dispel and Control, because she's hardened, using dream stuff. Not in the language of their world, not the language of the paranormal Pinkerton world. So Sean remembers Ragnarok and all the horrible things that happened. And one of the things he did is that he went after the heart of Kronos, and essentially, even though he didn't leave Violet to die, she died while he was gone because it's Ragnarok. You can't really normal people can't survive. Uh, and she's just a normal person. Out of all of them, she's literally normal. Um, and so he has this huge regret. He pursued something that ultimately didn't need to happen. Now, Violet was revived as part of the sort of deal to come over and to fight. And she was willing to do so. So like Sean thinks that if he uses the Ring of Dispel, he can essentially change the past through Nastasia's visions, so his wife Violet doesn't die alone. And so at this point, he meets up with her and he tries to make this case. And now I have to.
Historically, this has always worked out well.
This is absolutely has worked out well. He believes that he's not changing really anything important because one, the heart of Kronos was never there anyway, and in about 6 hours they get picked up. So it's literally on the wire. They aren't even really attacked at this point because Jack and Victoria and Jim has just killed so many of the enemy soldiers. But their world is still falling into hell. It's still dying. So he thinks he can just do it. Now, as an author, I have two paths I can take. Either Nastasia accepts it and does a very hard thing for somebody to basically comfort, somebody who he knows will die and will be revived, or she can refuse and basically sleep better at night. Because anytime she gets a vision from a paranormal Pinkerton, it's just bad. It is bad times. The angels refer to the world as terror or fearful, and it was very close to hell. So it's not a great place. There's a reason why most of the paranormal Pinkerton stories end in violence. Um, so in the end, I thought, okay, well, this could be a great scene. We could have some great character writing. But then I realized, one, it could very easily turn into emotional glurge. Two, it doesn't actually reveal anything that isn't already obvious in the characters. While Sean can have his regret, having it fulfilled is not the same thing as developing a character. It basically lets him redo something, and that's actually not as healthy as you think. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Though, again, in the moment, he doesn't really think about that. He just thinks, I could do it this way. I think I can do it this way. Because essentially, way I would describe it is like a funnel. You can go one way through the funnel, and then because they're going to get picked up anyway, they come back through, the other end of the tube, essentially. Because with the Ring of Dispel as the funnel, preventing her from going back. She's let in, but she's not let out, and he'd go with her. That's what he believes. Uh, so this sort of thing is he wants to undo something useless, but this character Nastasia has already touched Jack Morrow, and Jack Morrow on a normal day, just randomly walking down the street, is more terrible, more terrifying than most anything that isn't actively trying to kill her. So it's like I don't want to do this again. So what do I do? Does she do it, and I get my little thing that I want to do, or does she not do it, and essentially it's left unresolved? Sean is not the sort of person to take revenge on somebody just because they don't do what he wants them to do, even though he thinks it's a great idea, and it will be a very satisfying for him to do, or uh, with for no profit other than his own feelings, or this person. Like there's no negative to Nastasia saying absolutely not. That's ridiculous. You have to live with the choices that you made. And so Sean is like originally I wanted to do it. I had some great ideas. Actually see the characters. At the end of their rope, at the end of the world. Which again, interesting idea. Uh, and maybe could be used to reveal something because in Ragnarok end of the world scenarios, Jack gets suited up in a battle suit powered by a Nephilim heart, which essentially gives him infinite ammo and toughness and stuff like that. Because it's a Nephilim heart, it's half demon or half angel, depending on which versions you like. So it's like like I could reveal that point through there, or I can keep implying it throughout the story without saying anything specific. Um, at the parallel to this, Jim Donovan is having a solo adventure where he's going after the railgun plans. which is a thing in Rachel Griffin's stories. That the dude uses magic to design a super powerful ray gun, and they want it because they can think they can kill Jeremiah Pike way more easier with it. Um,
Of course.
of course,
The answer is a bigger gun.
the answer is a bigger gun. Not that he's any tougher than a normal human, really, but it'll be more satisfying to strike him with something from orbit.
I mean,
Um,
if all that's left is a pair of smoking shoes, I gotta
yes,
admit there's a certain visceral, right?
exactly. So like as a writer and as an editor, and I'm communicating with myself quite schizophrenically. How do I resolve this? Well, the answer is that there is no compulsive reason Nastasia, who is fundamentally a lawful good character in a very real way, would be willing to do it. Half
Yeah,
because of her personal distaste for the paranormal Pinkertons, who I am setting up as a sort of dichotomy of uh, for and against royalty. Essentially, they're just normal guys like
they're
Jack.
Americans.
They're
Right.
Americans. Like Jack Morrow has duties and responsibilities in the Ozarks, which will be returned to him. But like that's just kind of like, how do I want to put it? It's less about him having blue blood and more about him just being the toughest SOB who can handle it. And it's like the ancestral plot. Royal nobility, I guess, but it's like it's not about leading people. It's about being the biggest monster in the block and having people have to accept that he's the biggest monster in the block. It's.
Question.
But like, let me finish my point though.
Sure.
So what I had to do was, even though I really wanted this scene, I knew that there were multiple negatives that could hold this scene back and cause it to actually be a dreary, unfun thing for readers to have. Especially since I'm paralleling it with essentially a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure episode where Jim is trying to get these railgun plans under the nose of Gaius, William Locke, and Dredd, who are no slouches themselves. And I'm paralleling this up as well with another sort of emotional thing where Jack Morrow gets horribly mangled and Victoria botches the healing spell, so he's got a ton of shrapnel in him that requires surgery to remove. So he's out of the picture fighting wise. So it's like I've got things going on, and while I do need Sean to have stuff to do, and I like the idea of him bringing up the issue, in the end, I decided that there were too many negatives with Sean getting what he wants in story, whereas the positives of essentially Sean getting not what he wants uh, is that one, it doesn't interfere with the emotional beats of the other characters, and two, it gives him something interesting to sort of work on and to go forward. Especially since I'm like in the real stories, he's kind of second in command to Control because he has a social life. That's amazing. That's astounding. So it's like he has to work through some things for it and work through the disappointment while doing all the rest of his character work. So it's like it was difficult for me to come to that conclusion because I did spend a decent amount of thought on it. But ultimately, because I'm preserving the emotional impact of the other characters, and I'm preserving the timing and the character arcs that are being presented, I can say Sean doesn't need some sort of crazy event character arc, while also, sorry, I'm saying this convolutedly.
Mm.
Essentially, it was good for me to take it out and remove it because it meant that the other characters shine brighter and Sean can develop in different ways than always being satisfied. Like disappointment is as much a great way to develop characters as having the emotional highs. Does that make sense? I'm good. I think I said
Yes,
it. All right.
that
Uh,
makes perfect sense.
yep, yep.
Here's kind of a question I have. I can see it happen in a moment of extreme emotion, like usually something like rage at Jeremiah Pike,
Mm.
or the desperation to rescue Mother Morrow from the clutches of the Inferno. But usually the paranormal Pinkertons generally avoid black magic and its
Mm-hmm.
artifacts because they know it's evil.
Yeah.
And it has consequences in the story of this. This isn't Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Like, people mess around with magic, bad things happen to them. And so, like, is as outrageous as the Nephilim heart powered supersuit is. Like, that sounds like more something like a villain would use than one of the paranormal Pinkertons. They usually know better
Well,
than to mess with that kind of stuff, except in moments of grave temptation.
the story arc that Jack's going through, and the other characters are reacting to, is that something's wrong with him. So when he
Hmm.
comes on the Roanoke, he starts feeling tired and unable to act like he normally does. He's not whip violent as he usually is, and he's as not as capable of violence. And some people will be like, you know, it's probably a good thing. Uh, for normal people, sure, but like,
Right.
it's like he, when he was ripped from the suit, in universe, the angel was attacked by demons. So essentially, there was a time limit because even though the angel can stop time for humans, can't really stop time for demons or other angels or similar spiritual creatures. So essentially, it was like not quite a hatchet job, but it was like we're way too close to hell for me to be as good as I usually am with this
Right.
because there's a time limit. Uh, and so it doesn't like hurt Jack until he comes onto Magic Charge Roanoke, which the thing can feed off of.
Got it.
So what will happen in the end is that he's going to wrestle the Jesus allegory lion, and the Jesus allegory lion is going to rip it out of his soul. Um, you
Okay.
know, classic stuff.
Alrighty. I'm
Uh,
gonna have to fly here, folks.
mm,
Sorry about me being on halfway through.
No.
Yep. Thanks
See
for
you
having
later,
me on
David.
for a bit.
yep. So it's like there's
Always a pleasure.
always a
Mhm.
pleasure.
Thank you.
So there's reasons to do things and to have emotional beats for the characters, like Victoria, who's Jack's wife, who I haven't introduced in story yet, but I will in the third mega episode, which I'm plotting out. It's a little difficult, but because it's another wild hunt thing, and it's like anyway, um, she's
It's good, I promise.
it's good. I promise. I'm working on it. I need to finish Children's Hospital first. Uh, Ben, why do you have a story called Children's Hospital? Don't worry about it. So she's reacting to that. She's having problems with it because Jack was their protector in the magical universe that they are in. Killing goblins and elves and stuff like that for them and protecting them because the Jeremiah Pike tried to repeat what he did in the paranormal Pinkerton world, except the Mother Morrow character did it. She sacrificed her child to the altar, and it broke her. So they're essentially in like an alternate version. She's a different character, different soul, but it's you get these ideas here, and it's like, what's the logical through line? Uh, there's these characters have to go through different branching off points, but the thing is that there's only so much space on the page. So what's the focus? Well, if I focus on Jack and Victoria and Control and their dynamic, because Control also has things that she's going through. Uh, uh, what does Sean and Violet and Jim have? Well, Jim and Sean can have their own like quote unquote episodes, but they can't necessarily have the same heavy weight that the other characters have. It's the same with any story. Like, what lines can I put through? Jack has, having to deal with basically a polite society, which doesn't value the fact that he is incredibly violent towards Fae and elves and all this jazz, um, combined with his own internal illness, which is like a cancer. Uh, there's also kind of a spiritual rot to it that also has to be dealt with. Like these things can go forward, but if as an author and an editor, I have to choose between them. And even though the song for Epic doesn't necessarily reference a jetpack, quite frankly, it fits way too well with what the song is presenting. And there were many other options, like three or four of which we presented in this episode already,
Yep.
that he could have chose instead that would have been perfectly cromulent. For biggest example for me, and I'm going to agree with Anthony on this one, is the Dead Sailors. One, he could have edited because I'm pretty sure he had most of this written out well before any of this came out. Um, he could have had a line when they're going through the underworld. Odysseus, we are tormented by
Yeah.
Poseidon. What do you mean? We cannot enter our rest, etc. Like that's horrible singing. I'm so sorry. But like, that could have been a
I get your
song.
point, though. Yeah.
That could have been like literally 5 to 6 lines, not even 30 seconds. As he's because the scene in question, he's going through different spots of the underworld. He meets his mother. He meets Polites. Polites was killed by the Cyclops, right?
Um. Yes.
Hell, Polites could be the one to tell him that his crew's trapped. That would have been perfectly fine. And he other things as well leading up to Tiresias. So, there's plenty of opportunities, and then when he comes to Poseidon with the 600 strike, oh captain, and then they have their chorus lines. It's like my men, their souls in the storm itself. Like it's there, and it's perfectly epic.
Right.
It's
There's
perfectly
various
reasonable.
things you could do.
Yep, yep.
Look, like the first off, I will say that I am hesitant about wanting to change anything in the Underworld saga because the Underworld saga is a banger.
Yes.
Uh, like,
But the
though I
thing,
do
thing
get
that
your
I
point.
mentioned,
Like,
it's not that big of a change because it affects outside of it, and Polites can still have his moment. Like, as they're going through it, Polites, where are my men? Don't you know Poseidon has them? Etc. And he starts tap dancing on the deck of the ship. Uh,
exactly. Obviously.
obviously. So it's like there's a way for somebody, even an author, to remove themselves from their work and objectively judge it. The big thing with that though is that one, it is a skill that is trained and must be trained extensively and pretty much constantly. So it's like
Yep.
more of a discipline. I am constantly thinking about my stories. I'm taking myself out of my stories. When I complete a story, I go to a separate place after like I play like 2 hours of video games or something, and
Hmm.
then I edit it, even in a different computer sometimes. So it's like there's no continuity of physical position as much as you might think. And for some, the ability to kill your ego like that is almost impossible. Be-
Yeah, you need to have like just when it comes to writing generally, the famous saying is "kill your darlings," right?
yeah,
And the saying I think is true. I think that,
yep.
or at least there's truth to it.
There's truth
You
to it.
need to be, yeah, you need to be able to lose your ego, and if somebody tells you this is not like this is not working, if you trust that person, now you can't hear it from anyone and just anybody who says it, like that's not going to work. But you need to have people who you trust. And if they tell
Mm-hmm.
you that's not working, you don't necessarily need to listen because anyone can be wrong, right? But you need to be willing to listen, right? You need to pause for a moment and go, even though I really like this, what do you think is not working? And then you need to seriously
Mm-hmm.
consider, like, okay, he has given me feedback. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I have to follow it. This is why, like, you're right. It's just a skill that seriously needs to be trained because it's
Mm-hmm.
not obvious, it's not easy, right?
Right.
Like, not at all. But once you hear that piece of feedback, you need to kind of say to yourself, okay, like, what can I take from it? Should I take anything from it? Do I agree? And if not, why not? Now, you
Right.
shouldn't do it from like the rabble, the crowd, or whatever, unless, of course, there's like a consensus, which changes things a little bit, right?
Right.
Uh,
There's a difference between listening to the rabble and um, Phantom Menace. Like
yeah.
like the if you want to compare them, like take a look at like the J.J. Abrams episode 7, right?
Hmm.
Quite frankly, it is designed not out of any story beats or any unified purpose, but what the rabble might like in any given situation. It's almost AI driven, quite frankly. Um, whereas episode 8 is what the rabble will hate. Episode 7 is what the rabble would like at every stage. So
Exactly.
it's like, but Phantom Menace is interesting because it's like it's a unified idea of what George Lucas thinks is best and what people would enjoy, but not necessarily listening to the rabble. So it's like he thought Jar Jar Binks was a good idea, unironically, up until he saw it. So it's like there's subtle gradients. Like Merg Magler Maxis uh, uh, asked, "What's the best example of a bad idea turned into a great story?" For great stories, at no point will the idea actually be bad. Like you might have some ideas like that would never work. You know,
You were just wrong, though, because clearly it did work.
yeah, clearly it did work. Like there's some things like for example, there's a movie that's a Five Nights at Freddy ripoff called Willy's Wonderland. Willy's Wonderland is objectively terrible. It is crap all the way through. It's schlock. It is incredibly entertaining. It is not great. It's not a great story, but it's entertaining because it's Nicolas Cage saying nothing the entire time, killing satanic, soul, ghost, demon possessed animatronics who are haunting a small town. Uh, and there's like these moments of comedy, and it's like it balances. If it became more self-aware, it would be unwatchable. If um, if it was less self-aware, it would also be unwatchable because it would be too serious. Like this guy keeps up a habit, a pattern. Every hour or so, he plays 5-10 minutes at the pinball machine, and so he's in the middle of a fight with some of the animatronics. His wristwatch goes off. Beep, 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 looks at it, walks away into where the pinball machine is, and drinks a energy drink while playing the pinball machine. Do.
Amazing.
Like everyone is confused. The girl who's the last survivor is like begging him to help her, and he's just playing the game while she's being stalked by ghost possessed animatronics. Like if you took it seriously and didn't go in like this is going to be some great stuff, Nicolas Cage is an artist, you would not enjoy it. But if you were to call it great, no, like what's Digibro always say? Premise doesn't matter. Um, let
Yeah.
me let me ruin some famous books for you. A dude and his three friends tries to melt down some jewelry. Uh, there's some kids find a chair that takes you wherever you want it to, no matter how dumb. A dude has the longest salvation experience ever. Um, uh, Let me see here. A girl has fun in the Swiss Alps and never shows any sort of character development. Um, you could probably name what I'm doing. How about a harder one? Um, there we go. Memoirs from a war that never happened. Uh, some dude shows up at a castle and dislocates the real owner of the land's arm. Um, I can just keep going
Well,
forever.
yeah,
Pizza
I always
Delivery
mention
Man
this.
is an online addict.
Here's a really good example because I've brought it up multiple times on the show, and it kind of gets to the heart of what we're talking about. Nick Cole's The Savage Boy.
Yes.
Nick Cole's The Savage Boy is literally, with no exaggeration, if you were to read the book and I were to describe this, you would nod your head in understanding at how well I am getting across the plot. Like, it is about a boy who has in a post-apocalyptic wasteland United States who is going to travel to a radiation-riddled Washington, D.C. at the behest of his mentor in order to figure out whether or not there is any remnant of the government. This is almost certainly a an insane, ludicrous gamble, and he knows it. Over the course of the journey, he is nearly killed multiple times. He learns that Washington, D.C. is long gone, and that while the president did escape, he is killed not long after escaping. He gets married, and his wife is murdered, and then his horse dies. And he just wanders through the desert alone, looking to die.
Yep.
That is the plot of The Savage Boy. This is a plot that should not work. Like,
Yep.
it doesn't have any of the elements that you would say this is, that would make up a plot. And yet, it's one of the most beautiful and moving books I've ever read. But why? Well, part of it is the way the story is told, right? But it's also the philosophy of the storyteller that he's the whole point of the story is that he is telling a hopeless story, but the author of the book doesn't believe in hopeless stories, right?
Right.
Like, that's the beauty of it, that this is a story that in the hands of a lesser writer would be nihilistic dreck, right? It would be unreadable. But in the hands of a greater writer, it is the entire point that you are reading the story and he is finding the hope, right, in the middle of all of this horrendous tragedy. And, yeah, as Digibro says, when Digibro says premise doesn't matter, what he means is not so much that, like, it literally doesn't matter, but more like you can have something that has a supposedly terrible premise and it's great, and something with a supposedly great premise and it's terrible. His go-to example for the latter was always the show Gate, which was an isekai about, like, fantasy creatures facing off against the Japanese army. And as Digibro correctly points out, this is an immediately amazing premise, right? Like, your imagination goes wild at the idea of it. But the show is terrible. They don't execute.
Yep.
On the flip side...
It's a waifu thing.
Yeah. On the flip side of this, though, he mentions... Now, this is just his taste, so I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but, like, his favorite show ever was always K-On!, right? At least in the past. Then I think he eventually admitted that Neon Genesis Evangelion was better. Even he couldn't pretend K-On! Was better than Neon Genesis Evangelion. But for a long time, his favorite show was K-On!, which is like about high school girls that start a band, and that's it. That's the show.
Yes.
Right? Like, there's literally
It's
nothing
cute.
beyond
It's
that.
adorable.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a good show. It is infinitely better than Gate. Sir, it's not as good as Digibro says, but that's because Digibro ranks it insanely highly. Like, okay, relax. But it's good, right? Like, I don't have anything bad to say about it or anything, like, it's a good show. It is infinitely better than Gate because just by virtue of being worth watching, right? But the premise is less exciting. It's less interesting. Is the premise bad? I mean, no, it's not bad, right? It gives you opportunities for character dynamics, something interesting going on. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just not, like, specifically interesting. Or what I was talking to you about before the show began, one of Dostoevsky's most famous books is Crime and Punishment. A lot of people don't know. I've started reading it for the first time, and I know the story from, like, popular culture osmosis. And a lot of people don't actually realize what the story actually is. Literally, Crime and Punishment, the entire book, is about a man who talks his way into killing an old lady. Like, he rationalizes it to himself why it's a good idea,
Yeah.
and then spends the rest of the book essentially going like slowly insane because the rationalizations just don't work,
Yep.
right? Like, and that's it. That is literally the book. Eventually, he gets turned in, goes to the gulag, and in the final chapter, he repents, which is neat and all. Uh, but like, I can't even really tell you like. It's almost difficult to spoil, right? The only thing I spoiled is the repentance, I guess, and a lot of people don't even like that because they're godless heathens,
Yep.
who hate love and good things. Uh, but like, nevertheless, like you almost can't spoil the book. 'Cause that's literally the only thing that happens in it. It's considered one of the great masterpieces of the Western canon, as well it should be, because there's one of the all-time great studies of of nihilism versus meaning and
Yep.
purpose, right? Uh, and it is incredible at this, like flawless, honestly. Like, I'm not saying anything new here. I'm literally talking about one of like the foundational pieces of the Western canon,
Right.
right? Like, does it
Certainly
count as the
all
Western
Russian.
canon? I guess it does.
Certainly all Russian literature.
Yeah. So I'm not saying anything unusual here, but they're right. They're absolutely correct. Like, in my reading of it, it absolutely deserves its place, but not for the premise. Like, the premise is something that I would suspect that if anybody else tried to write it would be a failure. But Dostoevsky was the exact sort of man who could write that sort of book. You know, even The Lord of the Rings, honestly, as weird as it sounds, like you described as three people throwing jewelry into a volcano, which is like, I think, too reductive.
A guy and
for
three
three
friends
people.
try to throw
Yeah.
melt down some jewelry. Yeah, but it's like I was being reductive. But I was purposely being reductive.
Right, you were
Like the
purposely being reductive, but I would say though, even The Lord of the Rings, we have a very good example of. I think actually that the premise of The Lord of the Rings does sound exciting, but as we have learned in the history of fantasy following it, nobody but Tolkien could really do it, right?
Yep.
Like, which is fascinating. In fact, I think it actually provides a case study of a great premise that everybody thought could be that turned into a great novel that everybody thought would be infinitely repeatable, and in fact was not. Right? Like,
Yep.
it actually wasn't repeatable at all. So what do I mean by that? Well, believe it or not, one of the main reasons, as everybody who has read it knows, that The Lord of the Rings is so good is that it reeks of a very real history that bleeds through the pages. Right? And we happen to know that this history exists, but you don't even need to know it. Like, there are so many examples of this, it can be multiplied over and over and over, but specifically, like, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, which, in my opinion, is the high watermark of fantasy literature, right? It never gets better than this at any point. It's one of the great written scenes in the entire canon of Western literature. You have this moment where Theoden arrives at the gates of Minas Tirith, and Merry sees that the gates are open, and then Theoden charges, and there's a great recording of Tolkien reading this chapter. Like, somebody actually saved this recording and put it on YouTube and put, like, the soundtrack of the Lord of the Rings movie over it. It is cinema. I suggest everybody watch it. Like, legitimately, it's one of the most moving audio-visual experiences I've ever had, right? But, like, he is describing it, and then he's going, Theoden is not like, and then he's naming these figures from Middle-earth's past. He's like, he's not like this guy. He's not like this guy. He's like Arome, Lord of the Horses, from the first stage of man. And Tolkien's like dropping this casually into the middle of the book, right?
Yes.
With absolutely no, like, never been mentioned before, never mentioned again in The Lord of the Rings. And yet, it is done so, like, confidently that you totally believe that this is, like, a real part of Middle-earth's history. And you would be right, because it is. Tolkien did come up with all of this, right? Like, it in fact is a part of Middle Earth's history. Or when they fight Shelob, which is another amazing, amazing chapter in the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and Sam opens the vial, and it's like the light of the Silmarils. Like, this means something. Yeah, we have the Silmarillion now, but like, what on earth are the Silmaril? Right? Like, what does this even mean? Like, you actually have no idea when you're reading it, except that Tolkien says it all like so confidently and with such a clear grasp of like, this is part of the large historical cast of Middle Earth, right? That you're immediately like, oh man, the Silmarils are here. That must be a big deal. Yeah, like, but
Right.
the problem is that you can't fake this, and people try. They try
Oh, all
very
the
hard,
time.
and they try to a certain, and it sometimes succeeds to lesser or greater degrees.
Hmm.
Tolkien's not faking it. Like, the history he's talking about is something that he actually came up with. It really exists in his mind, at least, right? Like, you can cross-reference where the Silmarils came from, or who Orome the Horse Lord is,
Yep.
right? Like, all of that is there. Other people, when they were trying to make their ripoffs of the Lord of the Rings, what they were doing was coming up with all of the surface elements that are in the Lord of the Rings, not including any of the deep backstory that Tolkien put in. And as a result, the books read as incredibly shallow copies.
Shocking.
I mean, Sword of Shannara is the example of this.
Yep. And
So,
it's a pity because
yeah,
I actually know some people who really enjoy Sword of Shannara, and it's like, well, it's still kind of worse than Lord of the Rings. You know, as much as I love you, it's they're just a copy without the soul. Now, he wrote more Shannara books, but they're not that great.
yeah, it's they're not good. They're bad. Uh,
Eh.
but this is why, like, Tom Simon has a fantastic series of essays called Writing Down the Dragon. Basically, the idea is that people take entirely the wrong lessons from reading Tolkien. You can learn from Tolkien, like, and you should learn from Tolkien, as you should learn from any great writer. The problem is, like, what are you learning from Tolkien? If you're learning from, we should have a series of fantasy themed creatures who go on a quest, you're getting entirely the wrong message from the story, right? Uh, that's not even what really goes on. The thing about The Lord of the Rings that a lot of people miss, and that the Pulp Rev guys, to their credit, did catch, is that in many ways it is a subversion of a fantasy story, right? Uh, in fact, I would argue even more so in some ways than, like, for example, Martin's Game of Thrones. It is a subversion of a fantasy story.
Yes.
Because in The Lord of the Rings, it's like you do have a group of people who are going on a quest, but they're not going on a quest for something. They're going on a quest to destroy something. They're not going on a quest to fight the villain or defeat him. And in fact, the villain never appears in The Lord of the Rings. Like, think about this for a moment. Sauron literally never makes an appearance. He doesn't have a single line of dialogue. He is never seen.
Yep.
Uh, like, he's just essentially, the Lord of the Rings doesn't have a villain in the book. I mean, the Lord of the Nazgul shows up, but
Yep.
they're not even
His
the main
his
quest.
servants and such like show up.
Yeah, and
But
they're
it's
not even the main. And when they
yeah.
actually get into a fight with him, it's not even the main quest,
Yep.
right? Like,
It's just
Frodo
a
and Sam
random
are the main quest.
prophecy. It's just a random prophecy being fulfilled.
Exactly. And that whole thing, right? And the Fellowship of the Ring, so that group of adventures that we have, is broken up by the end of the first book,
Yep.
right? Uh, so all of these things are like, oh, it's such a classic fantasy story. None of that's actually in the Lord of the Rings proper, uh, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those. It's one of those things where you go like, okay, so all of that's wrong. Tolkien himself in his letters says that it is the point that Legolas does the least of the Fellowship. He is theoretically the most powerful of them, being an immortal elf,
Yep.
right? But he does the least. and this
Yeah.
is on purpose. And
He does.
Tolkien very clearly knew this was on purpose,
He
right? Like
technically
the
only
entire.
speaks to Frodo once.
Mm-hmm. He has almost no relationship with Frodo. There's even the fact that Aragorn is. They know him to be the prophesied king because the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, right? Which is
Right.
already like wild. That's not what you're supposed to. That's not how you're supposed to fulfill a prophecy as king. But that's what Aragorn is. Um, So Buster Shepard says something that I think is interesting, and I would like to discuss. He goes, "I disagree. You should learn from Howard instead. Also, Tolkien still ruined elves." Leaving aside the rhetoric of the question of like, yeah, more people should learn from Howard, right? Which, sure, I agree. Did Tolkien ruin elves? I think this is another pop culture idea, to be honest with you,
Yes.
and it comes from the fact of the Lord of the Rings, and it comes from this fact, right? That elves actually aren't in Lord of the Rings that much. Like,
Yep.
they really play a very small role in the Lord of the Rings. The main role of Legolas in the role, like, why is Legolas there? Well, the main reason he's there is so that they could build a bridge between elves and dwarves as a side plot, to be honest. Uh, I would argue that's like the main thing that he does in the story is that him and Gimli repair the relations between elves and dwarves.
Yep.
That's pretty much it, right? He doesn't play a role with Fangorn Forest. He doesn't play a role in like rallying anyone. He does take part in multiple battles, to his credit,
Yes.
but it's like he's one of many soldiers in the battles. Uh, Legolas actually has very little to do in the Lord of the Rings. This is why when you go Tolkien ruined elves, you're basing it off of the view of elves that we see in the Lord of the Rings, which is intentionally very, very limited, right? When you actually look at the full view of what Tolkien's elves are, you have people like Feanor, who's like a wild man,
Yes.
or
The
or
greatest.
Huron,
The
yeah,
greatest elf smith ever. You know.
yeah, or like Beren. It's Beren who was Beren the elf. Which one? Beren
Yes.
and Luthien, or was it
Luthien was the elf.
Yeah,
Baron
Luthien.
and
Okay.
Luthien, and it's like, who's the elf? It's the one with the elfy name.
I don't
Anthony.
remember.
Anthony.
But you have to understand, I don't particularly like the Silmarillion.
Oh.
I don't think it reads very well.
Mm.
But I never have. I've tried a few times, and I'm just like, I understand this is a history textbook, but it reads like a history textbook.
That's probably why I enjoyed it.
Yeah. But whatever. This is neither here nor there. The point is, it's like Tolkien's elves weren't these perfect little things. Like, first off, you get two versions of the elves because Tolkien changed his lore, right? The Hobbit version of the elves are like they're merry and jolly and sing a lot, and and they are immortal, but they're mostly just very cheerful, right?
Yes.
Right? But the Lord of the Rings version of the elves is that we barely see them, and to the hobbits, they're just extremely mysterious. But then when you look at the larger history, they're actually like this very tragic race of people, you know. And there's a lot going for them. But I would say the Lord of the Rings didn't ruin elves. The Lord of the Rings just didn't really talk about elves, right? Like, it didn't really care much about elves. Like, the other major elf, who are the major elf characters? Elrond, Galadriel, and Legolas. Legolas has like one line of dialogue to Frodo and does the least of the Fellowship. Galadriel appears in precisely one chapter of the book, of the entire Lord of the Rings saga, where she gives them gifts. And Elrond is just kind of like he's master of the House of Rivendell, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's the Lord of the Rings view of the elves. And Sam just kind of knows, oh wow, there's these mysterious, really long-lived creatures. Somebody pointed this out too, that in the book, one thing that you notice is that men treat elves and dwarves almost like we do in the real world, in the sense that when they meet one, they go, holy shit, you're actually an elf. It's like, I mean, I knew that people told me they existed, but I didn't think they actually existed. Whereas in the movie, it's a lot more like, oh, yeah, there's elves. But in the
Yeah.
books, it's a lot more like, damn, elves really do exist. Because elves are fading at that point. There aren't that many of them. They live deep in the forest. They don't interact with people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I guess like the men of Lake Town knew that there was a kingdom of elves in the forest, but they might not have. It's possible that not all of them knew they were elves. It's also possible that Lake Town just kind of figured it was common knowledge and didn't really tell anyone else, since it was one town. You
Yeah.
know. Um, so who knows what's going on there? But like, yeah, I don't really have a problem with. Basically, what I'm saying is I don't have a problem with Tolkien's elves because
Yeah.
I think that this idea of them as like, oh, they're just perfect immortal fey-like beings is kind of just it's not something that you actually see in the books. In reality, what you see is this is how the hobbits view them, and then we just don't see them that much, right?
And
Like they're
the
just kind of not in the narrative all that much.
right, and the thing with the elves is that they are mysterious and fey and all this other things, but they're also, sort of magnificent, and they're not really the same, though they are kind of, as the elves of, like, they're derivative from, like, the elves of, like, Midsummer Night's Dream and stuff like that, because he had a different purpose for writing them. Like,
Yep.
I actually discussed this in the short story, the novel I'm writing. Nastasia touches Jack Morrow for a vision to see what kind of world they came from, and she comes across the scene where Jack Morrow is running over elves who are hunting him in the wild hunt and enjoying himself. He is laughing. Victoria's laughing. They're having a great time. They're falling in love. This is like a date for them.
Yay!
And in their world,
Adorable.
there's like two different types of elves. There's the Fey elves, who often work in contract and are more akin to the third party of angels. And then there's also like a perfect elf, Elandria, who they have incredibly good memories of. So, in other words, she is watching creatures who look like one of her best friends who tragically died getting mowed down by two people who are grinning and laughing like loons in the heat of battle lust and general love lust. So it's like what do you do? Like you're facing different types of elves. You have like the evil elves, you have the really good elves, and then you have the gray elves. Like when you interact with those kind of elf theories, like you can do a lot with it. And Tolkien definitely went for like either gray elves for potential evil elves, but really he went for what we would call high elves. Even the what he calls like a gray elf or something is higher than the normal elf in other people's work. Especially in works like D&D nowadays, who have absolutely no connection with anything. They're basically humans with a longer life. Like, quite frankly, like there has to be something for it to be like a different species, if you get me. And most of these things just don't have it. So it's like, like there's, like, you can look through like literature and see what things go. Frankly, Tolkien was more connected to how elves were portrayed in English media than Elric of Melniboné and other people and other pulps and stuff like that. And I'm sorry to say it because technically Tolkien is parallel to and after the pulps, but essentially he was an elf revivalist. I guess I'd say. Like
Yeah. So
the timeline's muddy, but essentially, he's more right than other elf writers.
you're correct. Like the thing about the pulp revolution too, and why I've always been like very, very, very sympathetic to it, to the point where like I'm glad it exists, but I've also been like there have been times where I've been like, no, I don't really agree with that. Is there's this thing where there was a period of time where they tried to paint themselves as like opposed to Tolkien, which I think is a mistake for the very simple reason that like there is such a thing as objective quality, and Tolkien is better than any of the pulp writers.
Yes.
Uh, he just is. Like I am a huge fan of Robert E. Howard, and I think that Queen of the Black Coast is an actual masterpiece short
Yes.
story, one of the best short stories of the 20th century.
Robert Howard's
Uh,
worst short stories is probably better than anything we've written so far, quite
yes.
frankly. And we're
Uh,
trying.
yeah, like the Robert E. Howard Queen of the Black Coast, though, I think is one of the best short stories of the 20th century. Here's the problem with this, though. Why is Queen of the Black Coast specifically his best short story, which I think it is?
Mm,
Um, the real reason is that it's because it counters so much of his own philosophy as presented in Conan, right? Like, think about it for a moment. What's going on? Why is Queen of the Black Coast such a masterpiece? Conan presents his argument for his worldview in about as straightforward and appealing a way as Howard has ever presented it, right?
mm-hmm.
He's working as a pirate, and then he says basically that he thinks that when he dies, he's just gonna like wander as a shade in some sort of asphodel fields,
Yes.
essentially the non-materialist equivalent of nothingness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So since that is the case, eat, drink, and be merry. Kill and with a beautiful woman at your side and have fine foods. But Belit, the pirate queen who is his consort, disagrees and says that she believes that the afterlife does exist and that there is something more than just the nothingness, and that her love for Conan is in fact so strong that she would come back even as a ghost to save him, right? Well,
Mm.
Belit is later killed, lured by her greed, right? The
Yeah.
same greed that Conan believes, by the way, is the very meaning to life, you know, and yet it kills Belit. So Conan faces off against the monsters that have killed her and is nearly killed himself until the ghost of Belit rises from the grave and saves him from the killing blow,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
Proving that Conan's philosophy was wrong and that Belit's was right. And Conan then reneges his own philosophy, because if Conan were truly believed that all that mattered was, you know, money, women, wine, and doing what you wanted, he would take all of the gold for himself and continue his piracy, find another woman, of which Conan would surely find as easily as he ever would want to, uh, and continue his plunder. But he doesn't. He leaves the gold, he sets the ship on fire, and gives her a funeral. A funeral that, in theory, is a pointless waste of time and resources.
Mm.
And then he sails away, right? Conan, in this moment, has discovered something that is more important than what he believed was the very meaning of life. And that is why Queen of the Black Coast is a masterpiece. The thing is, it's a contrast to other Robert E. Howard stories, right? Howard
Yes.
doesn't normally present this point of view. It is an unusual story in the Conan canon for that reason. Uh, and a brilliant one. Like, I couldn't say enough good things about Queen of the Black Coast. And Howard did write it, so he deserves all credit for it. You know, I'm not trying to take that away from him. Uh, with that said, you could contrast the philosophy of Conan overall, not the Queen of the Black Coast, but Conan overall, with what Tolkien does with Faramir in The Lord of the Rings. When they discuss war, Tolkien is the person who splits the difference between the love of war and battle in Conan the Barbarian and George R. R. Martin's War is Hell and there's no, you know, and nothing is good about war, right? When
Mm-hmm.
Faramir says, I love not the sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness. I love only that which they defend. And that's the answer. It splits the difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Megabuster Shepard says, to be fair in regards to that, we merely told the Tolkien sycophants that he isn't the end all, nor the beginning of fantasy, and to read another book. No, that's not true. If that was all you did, I would be on your side. I have literally recorded arguments with Jeffro where he was very clearly going much further than that. So that's just false. Uh,
Sorry.
yeah,
Oh.
and I'm not even. I have. I'm not even like. It literally is. That's just not what was said. If that was all that was said, I actually completely agree with it 100%. I don't even have anything to add. Like, yeah, he's not the end all or nor the beginning of fantasy. There was fantasy before Tolkien. There's been great fantasy since Tolkien. Uh, However, like the arguments were something along the lines of like, oh, Tolkien was not including certain things in his stories, because he was trying to appease the mainstream critics, which is like if you know anything at all about J.R.R. Tolkien, that's such an insane thing to say. Like, I don't even know where to start with it, except like, but that's just not what happened. And you try and go, well, don't you think like an Oxford Don would do that? It's like, yeah, but he didn't. It's like he just factually did not do that. That isn't what happened.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, and then goes, that's Jeffro, not me. I mean, that's fair. If that's all you're saying, then I agree with
Well,
you. I'm just
and
saying,
here's the thing: like the people who were holding up Tolkien did not understand Tolkien. They
yeah, that's
were
true too.
like, quite frankly, I could make a solid argument, and I am going to do now, that they never actually read Tolkien. I only read Tolkien. Well, I read The Hobbit a bunch of times, and I've read the Silmarillion a couple times. Well, quite a few times. Uh, I've actually only read Lord of the Rings like twice. Um,
Mm,
you know, I
same. I
so it's
love The
like,
Hobbit, but
love
Lord of
The
the Rings
Hobbit.
I've only read like once in full, and then in bits and pieces since then.
Yeah,
But I loved it,
yeah. So it's,
because
and like we can talk about it in a deeper way than anything of those guys ever did. And like I remember those arguments, and Jeffro was more right than he could have been. But
yeah,
I want to be clear about that. We love Jeffro here. Um,
we do. We're very pro Jeffro.
I wrote his eulogy when they canceled him for as well. I rewrote a Mark Anthony speech, the Mark Anthony speech, for his eulogy when they tried to cancel him for being mean to Harmony Gold, quote unquote. He wasn't. Everyone knows he wasn't. But like they were trying. So it's like
Yeah, I want to be
we're
very clear. I am and was very pro Jeffro. Still
yes.
am. Jeffro rocks.
Je- Jeffro is
Nothing
friend
bad to
coded.
say about him.
However, we believe that he's wrong about Tolkien. He is not wrong about the odiousness of those fans he was talking about, but Tolkien himself. So and or you as well, I guess, if you're sort of the same cut. But we love you. We want to make that clear too. Um,
Aw.
yeah, we're friend coded, not enemy coded. Uh, so it's like, yeah. Well, what's fun with Tolkien is that because he did most of it as like his I'm also very bad at blood. He wrote most of his stuff as like bedtime stories. So it's like
Yep.
mostly his son's editing rather than any actual professional editor. Though I'm sure he had one. He
He
was working,
did,
and he
but
was
it's
working
like,
with C.S. Lewis too. But
yeah.
like, I want to be. I'm
It's
going to
also
tell
the
you,
fact that his son was Christopher Tolkien.
yes,
Uh, and Christopher Tolkien was actually like kind of a genius in his own right.
yes,
Yes, he was very young, but you'll like read stories of his son like catching contradictions that Tolkien didn't catch, like even when he was reading it.
yes,
And yeah, you're also right that like one of the major editors who wasn't exactly an editor but was like basically a beta reader was
yes,
C.S. Lewis.
yes.
Uh, who if there's
C.S.
anyone
Lewis,
who you want as a beta reader, it's C.S. Lewis.
yes. Well, it's like like basically there's a hierarchy of his son, C.S. Lewis, and then the editor. If but anyway, maybe he but it's we're a little bit far from topic. Lord of the Rings is a fantastic book, of course. Of course, I'm not saying anything contradictory here. Um, but it's something that you can't really imitate without being an Oxford Don. Uh,
Yeah, that's kind of the point I was originally trying to make,
no,
which is
I
that
am a Narnia fan, Mega Bustard Shepherd. I am such a Narnia fan. I have done
oh, I'm
several
a huge
shorts
Narnia
about
fan.
absolute. I've Mega Buster, Mega Buster.
No, Narnia is amazing. So That's the other thing. I've seen people try and be. There is a big crowd of people who are like, I love Tolkien, but I just don't like Lewis for whatever reason. I am not in that camp at all. I love Lewis's fiction. I tend to. I don't know if I like it more than his nonfiction, mostly because I really, really like both. Uh, with that said, is it true that Tolkien is the better fiction writer? Well, yeah, but Tolkien was like one of the great writers of the 20th century. Yeah, like, what does that even mean? Like, almost every writer who's ever lived is going to be worse than Tolkien. He's on a tier with Tolstoy, you know, Shakespeare, right? Like, yeah, Lewis is worse than Tolkien. So what? You know, that's hardly relevant to even talk about. Um, with that said, as far as writers that I personally like reading, I've always said that Lewis is my favorite author. Uh, so,
He
make
has
of that
said
what
that.
you will. Yeah, make of that what you will. The Great Divorce is probably my favorite book. Uh, I have taken more inspiration from Lewis's Till We Have Faces in my own writing than I probably have anything written by Tolkien, to be honest. Uh, although Leaf by Niggle, I have taken a lot of inspiration from. Leaf by Niggle is probably also one of the great short stories of the 20th century. It is profound, and and I've always found it like incredibly moving, and it's also like eerily prophetic for Tolkien's career. Like he wrote it as a very young man, fresh from World War One, and it like predicted the entire course of the rest of his life, uh, which is fascinating that he had that much self insight,
Yep.
honestly. But it's a very moving story. But as far as Lewis goes, like, look, Lewis is probably more famous for his nonfiction. Uh, and in terms of like my favorite C.S. Lewis nonfiction, it's difficult. Everybody loves The Abolition of Man. You can't go wrong with Mere Christianity as
Hideous strength.
yeah. Haha. Now, The Abolition of Man is his nonfiction version of Hideous Strength.
Fair.
Uh, but yeah, as far as his nonfiction goes, I mean, you can't go wrong with Mere Christianity. There's also just I also love his essay Man or Rabbit, uh, which is him trying to, like, people would ask him, can atheists or whatever go to heaven? And Lewis would basically say the people who are asking that question are the sorts of people who are definitely not going to heaven. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because the very fact of asking the question means you're looking for the out, which completely misses the point, right? Um, which I've always found Man or Rabbit profound. He has a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant essay on like the writing of the Gospels and literary criticism. That's like he has like a great line in it that's something along the lines of, I don't know. I think it was like, if you sometimes somebody says something that's so wrong you don't even know where to start with it, and it's like there was a literary critic, and he quotes a real literary critic from the time period who says something like, Jesus just doesn't come across as a real person in the Gospels, and then Lewis just basically says like, this is so wrong that you're almost at a loss of like how to delineate exactly how this is wrong. He's like, because Jesus comes across literally as one of the clearest personalities in all of like world literature.
Right.
It's like nobody comes through more clearly except arguably like Socrates, in Plato's
And
dialogues.
there's a reason they made Socrates drink poison.
Yes. Yes. But the point he was making was like, yeah, this dude's an idiot. He also has a great line in there where he goes like, I also think where he basically says it's really funny when people try and speculate like where certain ideas come from when they simply have no idea. And he pointed to there was another author who came out with a book at the time, which also had a lion in it that represented Jesus. And he goes, a critic opined that the writer was a friend of mine, which is true, and that the book was of a similar theme, which is true, and we had been communicating when he was writing it, which is true. So surely, either I or he was inspired by the other. And he goes, and the problem with this is that it is completely false.
Yeah.
I had no idea he was working on this book. He had no idea I was working on my book. The two had absolutely nothing to do with each other.
It's
Uh,
almost like the Jesus as a lion is completely unrelated to the Chronicles of Narnia and comes well before the Chronicles of Narnia.
it's almost like the Lion of Judah is in the
So,
Gospels.
well,
Um,
it's
yeah,
almost like it's a clear metaphoric throughput from the beginning of the Bible.
yes. Uh, yeah, but it's a really insightful essay as well. Tolkien does have some brilliant nonfiction, particularly on fairy stories. And Beowulf, the Monster, and the Critics are his two great nonfiction essays. And they prove that if Tolkien wanted to, he could have been just as significant a nonfiction writer as Lewis. Uh, but he decided he was more interested in writing The Lord of the Rings, and we're all better off for it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Not
but
everyone
yeah,
needs to be a critic. Even when, like, for myself, it's like I view when I review things less as a critic and more as an editor. Like it's just like we got plenty of critics, uh, plenty of critics, and we don't need to hear it, quite frankly.
yep,
Not
yeah,
for a while anyway.
you are absolutely right. Megabuster Shepherd says, I actually found Tolkien and Lewis through Doyle. So I
Huh.
love Doyle. In particularly, I have read all 60 of the Sherlock Holmes short stories.
So
I have not read any of his lost history fiction, though. I've really only read his Sherlock Holmes stuff. But hey, I love his Sherlock Holmes stuff. So, I am a fan of Doyle. Uh, I didn't realize he actually was a fan of Tolkien and Lewis, but I guess it's not that shocking. Well, when did he live up to, though, actually? I would think he would be in the time of Chesterton, wouldn't he?
so he published at the same time as Chesterton, give or take.
When did
Okay.
he die? I'm looking this up. Because that seems. I'm trying to think, like, would he have known them? Maybe? Because he.
1930.
So, when was The Hobbit published? I know it was in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
37. So, when did C.S. Lewis publish his first book? 1919. So I guess he theoretically could have known Lewis.
They certainly
Is this
read him.
Is it he could be a different
Well,
Doyle that
maybe
I'm
he's
thinking of.
saying that because he was reading Doyle, he came across C.S. Lewis and Tolkien.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah.
So it is possible that Doyle did know Lewis, though. He wrote his first book in 1919. It's called Spirits in Bondage. I'm actually curious about this. I thought his first book was Pilgrim's Regress.
I'm wondering how many of these people bought that book without knowing what it was about.
What, Pilgrim's Regress?
No, Spirits in Bondage.
I have no idea what it's about.
There we go. I was
Book
making
is
a bad
composed-
joke. Don't worry about it.
Oh, I see. Okay, hold on. His tutor, William T. Kirkpatrick, encouraged him in publishing the book. By the way, I wanted to ask you, and yeah, Buster Shepherd goes, that's what I meant. He, read Doyle, and this led him to discover them. Okay. But, by the way, I'm curious. I have somebody on a blog recently, I'm just curious what your opinion is on this, said that Lewis was probably a Gamma. So I've thought this over, and I'm not sure if the evidence is there. I think he reads to me more as Delta. Now, the thing that people will point to is that he ended up marrying a divorcee, right? Who was Joy something. I can't remember her last name. Joy, right?
Yes.
Who was a divorcee with stepchildren and apparently considered to be not particularly attractive. However, That strikes me as like it could have been Delta One-itis. It
I'm
happened
pretty
many
sure it
such
was
cases.
one-itis.
Like many such cases type thing. You know what I mean? Uh,
So it's like, here's the thing, like, she's not that bad. Kind of looks like who's that pop-eyed actor? And that's like large eyes, fine nose, fine mouth. Not
because I've
particularly
been thinking
attractive.
over
But
if
here's the
Lewis is.
thing: C.S. Lewis isn't very attractive himself as a man. Let's be real,
No, he's not.
Anthony. So it's like,
He's an ugly. Yeah,
who made the comment? Was it just some random person, or was it someone we should respect?
not someone we should respect, but not someone random. But I won't
Okay,
say who because I don't want to make unnecessary enemies.
okay,
I'll tell you after the stream. Uh,
okay, fine. So here's the thing: uh, like the attractiveness of a wife isn't a sign of alpha or beta or gamma or whatever. The I understand that. Well, like, one, Vox Day has often said that gammas often marry mannish women, um, and he does that mostly, I think, to make fun of Scalzi, whose wife looks like she could shoe horses by herself. No offense to her,
yep.
she seems like a lovely woman, but she did marry Scalzi, and that speaks to character. I'm kidding. A little bit. Only a little bit. But there's the question of C.S. Lewis and marriage to what's her name is not a question, is more of a question of one-itis than anything else. And quite frankly, there's more to life than the attractiveness of women when it comes to love. Partially because it's like, one, fetishes exist. Therefore, we understand that what men find attractive is differentiated between women and actions that do it. Even in a well-ordered family life, there are things that are done for the enjoyment of it, and things that are not done for the because who knows what, who cares what. This is well attested throughout time. The thing is that the question of a woman's attractiveness, because this is like the JD Vance thing again, uh, is like, one. It's how do I want to put it? She's not a free agent that you are judging between different women. Does that make sense? Like, if there's a girl I'm interested in, I'm talking to, and she's not very attractive. Uh,
Ah,
you know,
ah,
so we'll see. I'm not really even talking to her. I've just decided I'm going to talk to her. We're going to see.
oh ho.
Ho ho. Good Christian girl. If someone
We're
said, "Hey
discussing
Ben,"
this later, man.
yeah. Uh, so
Like
if
women. What?
yeah, women derogatory. Uh, the
Keep going.
like, if someone went up to me and said, "Ben, she's unattractive," well, sure, like, her face isn't an absolute top 10 launch 1,000 chips Helena Troy, sure, but she's nice, she's bulky, she's got a good singing voice. There's she's part of a good family. There are and like, but then, like, turn it to myself. I'm bald with a big messy beard, and I'm fat, and I'm working on the fat bit. And I'm not very wealthy. I don't have much money. Like, quite frankly, there isn't a lot for me to say that I deserve a 9 out of 10. Why in the world would I want a 9 out of 10? This girl has things that I think will be very compatible. Or, quite frankly, uh, uh, won't be compatible. Like, it's, how do I want to put it? Like, if you're a sigma male or an alpha male, I'm pretty sure this matters a whole lot more to you. But I'm not a sigma male or an alpha male. Quite frankly, I've occupied Bravo and Gamma and Delta positions and Omega positions more than I've ever been in any real alpha level positions. And it like, quite, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, hold out for somebody hotter? I maybe, like, if I get rich, like, if I get that je ne sais quoi that is, quite frankly, not in my nature to have. I don't think so. But the thing is that, like C.S. Lewis lived a certain way. He was a very intellectual man, And quite frankly, intellectual men, whether gamma or otherwise, don't really find wives unless they're like alpha or sigma. Hat tip to Vox Day. The and quite frankly, Oxford Dons. If there has ever been a true alpha Oxford Don, I would be absolutely shocked. Partially because I've read all the stories like Gormenghast that parodies Oxford Dons to hell and back. Nobody has a good opinion on the love life of an Oxford Don. Uh, like nobody. Like there are like one of the reasons why I can never get through Gormenghast is because of the second book, Gormenghast. There is a 200-page dinner party where the dude makes fun of Oxford Dons for 200 pages, and they're trying to attract one well over the hill woman, who is clearly hideous and stupid. There's no, I don't know. Like I wish I could belabor the point more without just saying it's like, quite frankly, people get the people they deserve, and God puts them together. You know, and I want to be clear, we respect Fox Day in this house, but it's like, you know, like with JD Vance's wife being a 3, which he has publicly said on one of his blog posts. No, absolutely not. I'm not going to claim that she's, my kind of girl or anything like that, but she's thin. She is well put together. And I want to be clear, anyone under 5 is fat, just as or otherwise physically deformed. Like
Mm.
I'm gonna,
Yeah, since
like
we're on this
there's
topic, and I know that I got you on it, so I'll take some
because
blame
it
here.
frustrates me. It
But
frustrates me so much to
yes,
hear that stuff because it's like I understand that you're smarter than me, but there's more to it than social intelligence here. You know, the like quite frankly, there's these pictures of C.S. Lewis with her as an old woman. She looks like my grandma, or how my grandma used to look. Um, she looks like an old English matron woman. Guess
yeah.
what?
So the
Yeah,
thing that I read was not from Vox, but it was basically, like I said, I'll tell you afterward who specifically, but it was
because I'm
somebody
hot
who
and
read,
bothered about this.
someone who reads Vox, and they said, well, it's well known by people who know that Lewis is a gamma. Now, I've read like summaries of his life story before, and I'm like, I'm not sure that I see it. The only thing that I could point to is that he married a divorcee, but
Yep,
which I, for the record, I would not recommend anybody ever do.
yep,
However, including Lewis, I think it was a mistake that he did it, but whatever. However, that strikes me as very, very easily possible to be Delta One-itis, right?
yes.
Like that, it doesn't strike me at all as necessarily gamma, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Lewis himself, like when you read his life story, there's nothing in it that seems to me to point to gamma. Like there was the fact that he made a like something had there was an unusual relationship he had with a woman who was 25 years older than him. Uh, so he had a friend in the army, and they made a pact that if one of them died, they would take care of their family. And his friend died, so he took care of his mother. And he always referred to the woman as mother and saw her as like a second mother. And
Mm.
there's like a long-standing debate over whether or not they had a sexual relationship. But the debate is it's weird that there's even a debate to me, to be honest, because
Yeah.
it's entirely speculative. Like Lewis never once ever admitted to doing this and referred to the woman as mother. Like I'm not really sure. It seems like the argument that he had a sexual relationship with her is just, well, they were very close and they lived with each other, so they must have.
Yeah.
But
But
no, they not necessarily at all. Like
it's like if he was calling
no,
her, you know, like if there was writing that came out or there was writing that existed where under a pen name he wrote the most disgusting mother fetish stuff you've ever imagined. Yeah, there'd be an argument for that. But there
yeah,
doesn't
but he
exist.
didn't. Right,
There's
like
so like I want to be clear throughout all of the literature that I've read from C.S. Lewis, from the Chronicles of Narnia to the Paralandra series to the nonfiction that I've read, there is nothing but immense respect for motherhood.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It seems to me like the way he describes his relationship with this woman is basically he had a hard relationship with his mother. He saw her as like a surrogate mother. And then it goes like, okay, but their bedrooms were close by and their children thought it was weird that they were so close, so there must have been something going on. But the thing is,
And the
whenever Lewis
woman's son
talked
was
about,
dead. You know,
yeah,
he shows up from the trenches of the Somme or whatever. Hey, you know, my best friend, you know, your son Virgil or whatever his name was, you
yeah,
know, has died. We made an oath to take care of each other's mother. You know, I will take care of you now as if I was your own son. You know, like how is that anything other than honorable?
right. So it's a really weird. So it's really weird that people are like, "Oh, it must have been sexual." When, as far as I can tell, this isn't actually based on any hard evidence. The very fact that we're debating it is kind of weird to me because
Yes.
it seems like one of those things that's inappropriate to even debate. It's like the man never said they were in a relationship, and she never said they were in a relationship, and nobody ever witnessed any sort of relationship. So, why are we talking about this?
Yep.
Like, it's really strange. Like, yeah, their rooms were close together. He took care of her. You know,
Like
like she was an old lady.
and like
Uh,
to be clear, like English bedrooms are just like by nature next to each other. There's no like alternate housing or anything ridiculous like that. You know, like it's genuinely like what was she supposed to sleep? You know, like in the shed. You know, was he supposed to sleep in the shed? No, that's not Alpha. You know, like there's no. I don't know. I
yeah,
don't
plus
know.
the quote, I'm looking at the Wikipedia, and his biographer wrote this in the 1997 edition of the biography. After conversations with Mrs. Moore's daughter, Maureen, and consideration of the way in which their bedrooms were arranged at the kilns where they lived,
Mm.
I am quite certain that they were in a romantic relationship, is what he's saying. But that's
So
such a weird thing to say. It's like, okay,
so he
so
was
let me get
quoting
this
someone
straight.
else, or was he? Was this what you know someone else was telling him?
He's saying that he had a conversation with the daughter and he looked at the way their bedrooms were arranged and it changed his mind. But that's a really weird thing. It's like, unless the daughter is reporting that she witnessed something,
Right.
like,
And it's
I
like
don't really see how that would change anything.
so I've literally just come from England like 3 weeks ago. So like when I was in my aunt's house, either of the aunties, uh, guess what? My bedroom was less than six. My bedroom doors, pretty much at all times, except for in the Mackenzie house in Comrie, was about 6 feet away from them. Nothing happened. This is gonna sound crazy, but proximity does not imply degeneracy.
And even the
Proximity
fact,
implies
like,
war.
how old was her daughter? And for that matter, like, what is the daughter saying she saw? Like, just that they were really close with each other, which, but Lewis was open about that. We know they were close with each other.
Yes.
So I don't see, like, what could she have possibly said besides, yeah, I saw him doing the beast with two backs. It was weird. Uh, which that's not, doesn't seem to be what was reported. So I don't really get it.
Mm,
Yeah, just generally, as I look through Lewis's life, it screams Delta intellectual to me. It does not
yes.
scream Gamma. Uh, and the Joy Davidman thing just screams like one-itis for he got infatuated with a woman who he considered to be an intellectual equal. Uh, and it caused him to make bad decisions. I do
Mm-hmm.
consider the marriage to Joy Davidman a bad decision, by the
Fair
way, as
enough.
much as
I
he did
also
a lot.
kind of agree with you.
Yeah, uh, I know that he did genuinely love her. He wrote a beautiful book after her death, which I do highly recommend to anybody who loses a loved one, called A Grief Observed. Uh,
Mm.
a Grief Observed is a gorgeous book. It's like very, very difficult to read though, but it is a beautiful book. So I have no doubt that his relationship with her was very genuine, but it never struck me as Gamma. It just
Mm.
struck me as like he got one-itis for a particular woman, and it caused him to make a poor decision. Yeah. Um, Everything else, like the one last thing that you might say is that he eventually broke off his friendship with Tolkien. Tolkien is interesting because Tolkien is very, very, very clearly a Delta.
Mm.
Uh, like his relationship with his wife makes this extremely clear. He got absolutely infatuated with her at a very young age, to the point where, like, the infatuation actually kind of hurt the real relationship. Like, this is absolute pure Delta. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like like that level, that's exactly what you're kind of warned about. If that's your, behavioral tendencies, that's the sort of thing that you're warned about not doing, and that's what Tolkien did. So the fact that they had a falling out could make, but the thing is, like, we don't really know exactly how it happened. It's also just the fact that they got older. This happens with people all the time as you get
Yeah.
older. Like,
I mean,
so
I
I
had a
don't know.
falling out with a friend of 12 years. I just said, I don't like your life. I don't like how you're living. And I find it weird that you're living the way you do, and I don't want it around me. That's
Well, there
it.
are people who I was great friends with who, like, I don't talk with very much, but it's not even really for a specific reason. Just
Mm.
we grew apart. We don't talk much. If we saw him, I'd say hi. We'd be polite.
Tolkien didn't like
Uh,
how C.S. Lewis was doing adjectives. It's how it
um,
happens sometimes. I don't know. We don't need to hash
to be
out
honest,
things.
my understanding is that the main thing is that Tolkien never really got over that Lewis didn't become Catholic because he was such a big force in Lewis's. Like, seriously though, he was such a big
That's
force in
kind of
Lewis's
worth it.
conversion. Yeah, a little bit. He was such a big force in Lewis's conversion, so he thought that it was like a matter of time. And also,
He was an
Lewis does
Anglican.
hold
He's
some.
just right there.
Yeah, exactly. And Lewis does hold some positions that are really like all but Catholic. Like
Yes.
he has like a view of purgatory that is very very Catholic
Yes.
leaning. Yeah. So I think it like genuinely kind of hurt Tolkien's feelings and frustrated him that Lewis didn't end up becoming Catholic, and that's what led to the falling out. So it doesn't really seem connected to Lewis being Gamma. Like,
Yes.
you know, it just seems like a normal, like a normal type of disagreement between friends. Uh,
Yes.
Lewis was kind of hurt by whatever, by what Lewis's position on the subject, and
I need a key.
Lewis was not going to change his views just because Tolkien wanted him to.
Yeah.
So it didn't really go anywhere, which is too bad, I suppose. But
Well, I
it
disagree for
happens.
obvious reasons, Anthony.
Yeah. Yes, but it's too bad. I guess those sorts of things do
Yeah.
happen. Um, I don't really have like, I don't know. I wasn't there,
Right.
right? Like,
It's like I'm not going to
they're adults.
criticize, yeah, them for it because quite frankly, the only thing that's really worth, like breaking up a friendship like that between Christians is differences of theology. And quite frankly, they're both in heaven right now.
Yeah, I would think so.
Or at
It's
least,
hard for me to say otherwise,
yeah, we
right?
can't say like, but there's no sign that they were anything but faithful in their belief in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
Hmm. I mean, there's been like a bit of a movement to canonize Tolkien in the Catholic Church, which,
Uh,
as much as I like the idea, I've always been of the opinion, like as I researched Tolkien, that I actually don't really think you should do it, because Tolkien's children, like Christopher Tolkien, became an atheist, and his
oh,
wife was not really a particularly strong Catholic, and I'm not saying that Tolkien is to blame for this, or that Tolkien was not. He was assuredly deeply disappointed by this. Like, it probably killed him, honestly. Like, I'm sure
yes,
it ate at him. But so I'm not saying that he is to blame. I'm saying if we're gonna canonize someone, like his primary mission is to his wife and children, and in this sense, I'm not sure if you should hold him as an example to other people when, factually speaking, he did not bring them where, like,
yep,
I'm sure he tried. I am not doubting his sincerity, nor am I even doubting that the man is in heaven, because I am sure that this was a great disappointment to him. uh, but like, when you're saying, oh, this is an example to all Christians, like, really? Because he didn't even get his he wasn't even an
yep,
example to his wife and kids. So
yeah,
I'm not so sure about that. With that said, I am a great admirer of J.R.R. Tolkien. who, by all accounts, was a man of quite remarkable integrity and good character. You know, like there's nothing personally to dislike about him. Supposedly, after Vatican II, he would go to the mass and just loudly yell all of the responses in Latin, which is hilarious. Uh,
Very Catholic.
yeah, he was very grumpy about the fact that they got rid of the Latin in the mass, so he would just yell out the last and embarrass his grandson. Like, and his grandson would be like, "Grandpa, please don't." Grandpa, just say, Grandpa, just say, and with your spirit in English. And
Not, you know, I broke up with Lewis. I'll break up with you too, Grandpa, please. Uh, but
it's
yeah,
actually really funny. All right, and on that note, do you have anything to add? Because we've been going a while and off
yeah.
topic, but it was fun. I enjoyed it.
No, we talked about important stuff, and quite frankly, you know, a lot of the stuff, like one of our works, we didn't really talk about themes, but that's fine. But one of the big things about us as authors, you know, with our you know, with John C. Wright, my literary master, and quite frankly yours and too, but maybe if you accept him, it's like the theme for us is the Christian service to God, you know, and quite frankly, when you remove yourself from the domination that ego gives you over a story and look for what God actually wants to bring out of your story, which also is a muscle that you need to train. Um, and it may seem weird. How do you train your relationship with God? Well, you know, you read your Bible, you pray, you look for what He wants, and oftentimes He tells you. He speaks all the time. And He works with what you want, but not in the way that counters anything that He desires. Uh, you know, it's like a built-in quality thing. You know, once you get it up and going. Um, you know, it's seeking that goal, that ideal, doesn't come from ego, doesn't come from pride, doesn't come from anything other than humble Delta-like service. And I think the more people go for that stuff, the better off that their writing will be. Got anything else? You good?
Quick comment watch, because I did miss a couple things. Uh, Merg has a few things to say. What crossover exists between Superversive and Grimdark? I've heard some convincing arguments from Dave Martell. Just wanted to ask. My thought: Grimdark can be superversive if it avoids nihilism, but the genre does seem to lean that way, so I would be skeptical. Uh, I don't know. Anything more than that you want to say?
Mm-mm. Nope.
Okay.
All right.
Especially, yeah, English houses are notoriously cramped. Nothing burger, to be honest. I agree. Lewis, I'm loyal to the crown. Tolkien, if he breathes, he's a prop. Begin sword fight. I enjoy it.
Did Christopher
Did
die an
Christopher,
atheist?
to my knowledge, but I could be wrong. I
Okay,
hope I'm wrong.
whoopsie.
Uh, I honestly feel that Tolkien canonization would be politicized in some way, like Saint Teresa was. Teresa of Calcutta, that's Mother Teresa. She deserved to be canonized. Christopher Hitchens started a hate campaign against her during his life that was disgusting and shameful. The woman would absolutely deserve to be a saint. She was a hero of the people and was a remarkable person. That is my official viewpoint of Teresa of Calcutta based on my own research. Essentially, what Christopher Hitchens tried to do was be like, oh, his nuns would, you know, they wouldn't provide good medical care, and Teresa didn't even go to her own hospitals and when she had to be treated. Meanwhile, her nuns were like grabbing people who were on the street, you know, dying of dysentery with nobody to take care of them and giving them dignity, you know, with like
Mm.
that woman absolutely was a saint. The politicization of it, yeah, there was some politics involved in the sense that she was very popular, so it was like an easy win for the Catholic Church. Uh, like, so it was rushed. Uh, yeah. Uh, but Christopher Hitchens was the person who led like the campaign against her, and his campaign was a monstrous, libelous piece of utter slander. It was evil, and it should be denounced at all costs and with
Who is
all our
this?
power.
I'm
Christopher
sorry.
Hitchens. He was one of the four horsemen of the New Atheists.
Oh, that's
He was
right.
the person who spread the Mother Teresa was a terrible person,
Oh,
actually.
yeah. Okay.
But like,
Sorry, I
remember
got
when
distracted.
yeah, remember that the person who did this was one of the four horsemen of the New Atheism, known liars,
Yes.
right? Like,
All of them.
these were horrible, horrible people. Um, but yeah, I'm sure there was politics, just in the sense that like she was really popular, so they did like fast track her canonization because it was just like an easy win for the Catholic Church. But she absolutely deserved it. Yeah,
Mm,
I don't have a problem with it.
yeah, I can't find anything that says that Christopher Tolkien is atheist, by the way.
I'll try and find it. It might have
Mm,
been one of his other sons.
fair enough.
Let's Google.
Yep. Though, quite frankly, I'm pretty done.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming in. Next week we'll have something else. We shall see. Or else we'll do something interesting, maybe a soft shoe tap dance routine. Audio only, sad to say. Have a good night.